Hello everybody, and welcome to another audiobook stream, belatedly celebrating Spooktober. Yes, sorry about the timer at the start of stream. Messed that up. I do hope everybody is doing well tonight. I'll have to do a short stream because I'm late even by my standards, and I had a long day at work today. Well, first going out voting, getting to the polls, and then going to work. And I have a long day tomorrow. I have to go to a mix, and I have to be there an hour before I would normally be at work, and I think it'll take me, should I budget 2 hours to get there? Probably. You know these buses. So, and of course that doesn't mean I can leave work early. That would be silly. So tomorrow will be a long day, and we're just going to do one chapter of this book. Oh, and thank you to everybody who came out to my last couple of streams. On Saturday, we finished Amber Journeys Beyond and played a short horror game called The Briefcase. And before that, we were playing mostly Amber Journeys Beyond and Resident Evil 3, and a little bit of spicy candy. Yes, didn't get to as much Halloween stuff as I would have hoped this year, but we will still have a Halloween special at some point. And as a reminder, the new community challenge is live. And I won't be, when I start reading, I won't be responding to chat until we finish the chapter. And I have rage disabled and alerts turned off, just for the sake of having clean audio for the VOD, and for me eventually editing it together and putting it on LibriVox, as I have threatened to do for, is it 3 years now? You know what? We don't count numbers around here. But this is chapter, I think this will be chapter 5, right? And yes, we just finished the chapter called Endor, and you'll have to watch the previous VOD to see whether or not Ewoks showed up. But considering this is a 1920s horror novel, it's not likely that Ewoks will show up. We should be so lucky. Check it out, I got an I voted sticker. Chapter 5. Mrs. Furnival. He stopped, and the voice of Evelyn Wake continued. You left me at the point when we all came into the front garden together, and Mr. Furnival carried Ronald off upstairs to his study. He's told you that he didn't like leaving me. Well, I'm sure I felt it more than he did. Not because I was frightened by the stories about Jerry. I'm not the sort of person who sees ghosts, so those things don't worry me, but because he seemed to be dragged away from me by something invisible, like the undertow of a tide. But in any case, quite apart from any question of good manners, I couldn't have followed him. Mrs. Furnival clung so tightly to my arm with her little podgy fingers, just as if she, too, were frightened of getting out of her depth. I'm not much of a swimmer myself, but I felt bound to give her moral support, whatever good it might do her. Why? Well, to begin with, she was a woman, and married to that white-haired monstrosity. I was sorry for her, and liked her most awfully. It seemed queer that she should have found it comforting to take the arm of a stranger like myself. It shows how lonely she was, and rather flattered me as well. It gave me a sense of responsibility and trust that took some living up to. As Ronald has told you, she had been whispering to me in the garden, but there was nothing at all mysterious in that. She just went on talking innocently, like a child, about the flowers. She really loved flowers, and about her husband's skill in gardening. Evidently she was tremendously wrapped up in him, in spite of his weirdness. It was, Mr. Furnival says this, and Mr. Furnival does that, all the time. Of course, she may have been trying to make me think she was happily married, though anyone with 2 eyes could see she wasn't. Women do talk like that, particularly with other women. But honestly, I don't think she was clever enough to pretend. For better, for worse, she was devoted to him, and thought that there was nobody like him on earth. And as far as that goes, I think she was just about right. There wasn't. But, weak and spare and pitiful as she seemed, there was something very sweet about her that compelled me to be gentle. For instance, no woman who wasn't an angel could have put up with the digs that he kept on giving her about her religion. When people go to the trouble of changing their faith, it stands to reason that they must feel strongly about it, and yet she showed no resentment when he made fun of her conversion. The only time that she appeared to be distressed was when he spoke about the haunting of the house. Then Ronald says he saw her eyes go miserable. I didn't notice her eyes, but her hand tightened on mine, oh, so pathetically, that I felt I wanted to take the little thing into my arms, and even then she reassured me with a smile. Well, there we were, standing in the hall, and Ronald swept away from me. When the men had disappeared, we followed them upstairs at about a quarter of their pace. Mrs. Furnival went very slowly, pausing for breath. She said something later on about her poor heart. At the top of the first flight, she led me into that long room where all the books were. The fire had burned up brightly. It was very cozy. It smelt as if they had been burning cedar, I told her. Ah, that's incense, she said. Mr. Furnival must have thrown some on the fire. He's very fond of it. How extraordinary, I said. Just now he seemed very bitter about your having become a Catholic. Oh, yes, she said, but Mr. Furnival is a deeply religious man all the same. He always serves at the Eucharist. He's an Anglican Catholic, you know, and Anglicans are awfully fond of incense. All through this she was moving aimlessly about the room, pulling the chairs from one place to another and patting the cushions. "Come along, my dear," she said. "Let's make ourselves comfy. We shan't see the gentleman for another hour. I know what Mr. Furnival is like once he gets talking about books and that." She made me lean back in an easy-chair facing the fire. Then she pulled up a big satin pouf and perched beside me. After that, there came a long silence that made me want to get up and about to make sure that I was myself. Everything there seemed so unreal. I wonder if you'd understand. No, of course you don't. And yet, I can't tell you how thankful I was when she began to talk. By this time, she had got hold of my hand again, and she spoke, and as she spoke, she kept on fondling it. "I know it must sound odd to a stranger," she said, "the way in which Mr. Furnival talks about my conversion, but you mustn't judge him harshly. It isn't his fault. Mr. Furnival is a man with a very strong mind, much stronger than mine. He's so much cleverer than anyone else, you see, that he finds it impossible to put himself in the place of stupid people like myself. He doesn't realize that if I hadn't become a Catholic, I couldn't possibly have gone on living here. I think my mind would have given way, my dear, and if I weren't here to look after him, heaven knows what would happen to him. You see, he is so wrapped up in his studying and investigations that he has no time to think about his own comfort, and he has such a practical, sunny nature that he doesn't see what a terrible house this is." "But if this house is as terrible as all that," I said, "why don't you persuade him to leave it?" "My dear," she said, "you don't realize what you're saying. Mr. Furnival adores it. He's bewitched by it. I think he'd rather sacrifice his life than leave Cold Harbor. He can't see anything abnormal. He simply can't see it. He's blind to it. That is his terrible misfortune. That is the awful, awful danger." Her words didn't mean much to me. Her behavior all along had been so queer that by this time I felt sure she wasn't quite sane. I told myself that nothing that she said really mattered for that very reason, and that it was my duty to let her go on talking for the good of her soul, so I made up my mind to sit through it and keep my end up till Ronald returned. "Please be patient with me," I said, "if I seem to be dull, but really I don't understand you. Why is Mr. Furnivall in danger? What sort of danger is he in?" She hesitated. "In danger of his life," she said slowly. "But that's nothing to the danger of his immortal soul. If God would only give him the power to see, if my prayers could help him to see for himself. But he won't. He can't. They've hardened his heart. He's possessed, my dear, possessed, and nothing that I can do is strong enough to release him. Nothing but a miracle or the power of some living saint can do that. It's too terrible, terrible." "But what exactly is terrible?" I asked her. "The house, and the dreadful influences in the house," she said. "You know what Mr. Furnivall said to us in the garden, that he'd never seen, heard, or felt anything, when we joked about Jerry? It's a silly name, isn't it? But it was the best I could do. I invented it myself, as I told you, so as to conceal the awful reality from the children. Thank God, they've all grown up and left us now, and found safe places to live in. It was the happiest day I've known in Cold Harbour when the youngest left us. That's a funny thing for a mother to say, and yet I say it from the bottom of my heart. But after all, I said, the things that Mr. Furnivall told us, about the governess's candle and the clergyman's braces, you know, didn't seem to me so very dreadful as all that. We've often heard tales of that kind about houses before, and people just laugh at them, as you did. Honestly, if that's all you have to complain of—" "Oh, my dear," she broke in, "you don't know what you're talking about. Of course that's nothing. Nothing. It wouldn't frighten me a bit if that table in the corner were lifted up this moment and placed in front of the fire. Things like that oh, well, they're nothing at all, you see. But this house, what a blessed thing it is for you that you don't feel it. This house is full of other influences, not poor dead memories whose shadows we can see, but forces of active evil, just as Mr. Lowe said in his letter, hostile influences whose power we are unable to measure. You remember how Mr. Furnivall made fun of that? But Mr. Lowe realized the seriousness of it. He knew something about it. Perhaps he knows more about it now that he's gone. He was such a good man." She stopped, and I made no reply. I suppose that was what encouraged her. From that moment her story came gushing out like water from a sluice. Nothing that I said could have stopped her, so I thought I'd better let her go on. It was so monotonous and steady that I scarcely listened to her at first. I began to feel sleepy. "It began 20 years ago," she said. "At that time we were living 7 miles from here, over at Dulston. I say 7 or 8 miles, but really, my dear, it was quite another world. You see, in those days Mr. Furnivall was in business. As you see him now, you wouldn't think that he had ever been a businessman, would you? But whatever he put his hand to, there'd always be the same cleverness. People often told me, in confidence, what a remarkable man he was. We were very happy in Dulston. All the children were born there, you see, and the house was one that we built for ourselves, so cheerful and clean and easy to work. Then Mr. Furnivall had a great blow. You see, his mind worked faster than the others, and that made them jealous of him. Anyway, things went wrong, and the directors wouldn't back him up. For a short time he was very ill. I really feared that he was going out of his mind, but then his brain's so very strong that I doubt if anything could do that. He lost a lot of money, too. We had plenty to spare, thank heaven, so that didn't make much difference, but we were forced to leave Dulston, which was a dreadful pity. I became so attached to the house and that. You see, when Mr. Furnival had got over his blow, he said, quite naturally too, that he'd never put all his strength again into work that wasn't appreciated. He'd finished with work, he said, and I agreed with him, as I always do, though it did seem a pity, too, for a man in the prime of life like him. He just set off one day on his bicycle. He was a great cyclist, and I heard no more of him for a fortnight, after which he wired us to join him at a place called Lapton Huish in Devonshire, where he'd taken half a farm on Lord Habberton's estate. Such a lovely spot it was, too. The farming people were so kind to us, in spite of being dissenters, and the children had the time of their lives, what with the country air and scalded cream and that. Mr. Furnival furnished a room of his own that he crammed full of books. He used to spend his time in study, and taking long walks and rides through the country. He knew much more about the churches than the people themselves, and yet he wasn't happy. You see, he's so energetic, my dear, that a quiet life of that kind couldn't content him. He might have spent his time educating the children, but he preferred to let them run wild. That was his theory, you see. Of course, it was difficult for him, with all his learning, to put himself on their level, and, after all, health is the only thing that matters when high-strung children are concerned. They took after him in that. Of course, I knew that Mr. Furnival, being what he is, wouldn't put up with such a quiet life forever. All the time he was looking round for something more in his line, as you might say, and at the end of 5 years, the happiest 5 years of my life, I think, he came and told me that he'd taken a long lease of a house in Worcestershire, of this house, in fact, and back we all came. I didn't like it from the first. Naturally, it was a strain to begin housekeeping again after so long an interval. But one's duty lies with one's husband, and he was mad on it, quite his old self, in fact. I remember the first day we drove up here. It was an autumn afternoon like this, not a leaf on the trees, in the fumes from the Black Country, you know, that made them fall so early, and the garden in such an awful tangle because the place hadn't been occupied for years. Oh, my heart simply sank within me when I saw it, for it was so cheerless, such a contrast to Lapton, where the dear children had almost lived in the sun. Mr. Furnival only laughed at me. Well, I thought, it's a mercy anyway that he's got over his blow, and really it was a treat to see the pride he took in it. It made a young man of him again. We all put up at the Fox for a month. In those days, poor Mr. Higgins was alive, and Mrs. Higgins made us very comfortable. While we were there, Mr. Furnival and the children used to spend all their time up here. It seems strange to me that they didn't notice the difference from Lapton, but novelty, of course, is everything to children, and it was my duty to make the best of it, though you can't conceive how hard a task that was. It's impossible for me to tell you how I hated Cold Harbour even then. To begin with, it was so dark. I begged Mr. Furnival to put in the electric light, but he said he couldn't afford it. Something about fire insurance, and that it would spoil the character of the place. Then I hated those trees, the beeches that you see through this window. They seem to shut the place in so. I asked him to have them cut down, but he wouldn't hear of it. And then I didn't like the house being next to the churchyard. It's just the other side of this wall, you know, because a thing like that couldn't possibly be healthy for the children, though, of course, it was an advantage having the church so near. Mr. Furnival and myself quite agreed on that, for although he's so naughty about my conversion, he's really a deeply religious man in his own way. Still, I went on feeling unhappy. Mr. Furnival said it was the change of climate, and made me see a doctor about it, but I knew for certain it wasn't that. It was only when I came to Cold Harbour that I was miserable. I was quite contented as long as I could stay on at the Fox. I used to tell him that I felt sure that there was something wrong with the drains, but he wouldn't have it. It was the place he'd been looking for all his life, he said, and after all, he came first, didn't he? One evening I was back at the inn, so wretched that I simply had to tell Mr. Higgins about it. He seemed to understand at once. "Why, don't you know," he said, "yonder old place is haunted. I thought everyone in these parts knew that." I told Mr. Furnivall what he had said, and that made him quite angry. "What, you call yourself a Christian," he said, "and allow yourself to be frightened by pagan superstitions?" Of course he was perfectly right. I knew I had only shown him my lack of faith, but the vicar who lived at Cold Harbour then was a dreadfully low churchman and wouldn't hear confession, so I couldn't get any spiritual comfort from him. Shortly afterwards Mr. Furnivall quarrelled with him, as was quite natural, and the living was never filled until Mr. Lowe came. So, at the end of a month, or rather more, we moved here. I tried to be as cheerful as I could. I took a tonic that the doctor had given me, and nothing happened, I'm thankful to say, for several months. Of course, I felt just as dreadful as I knew I should, but Mr. Furnivall was so pleased and excited, and the dear children, thank heaven, seemed so insensitive to the awful feelings I had, that I persuaded myself I was suffering from the lack of faith that Mr. Furnivall had pointed out to me, and I tried my very hardest to make the best of it. I never referred to my own discomfort if I could avoid it, and then, naturally, not in the presence of the children. That wasn't easy, I can assure you. We kept on having reminders that the place wasn't what it should be. We had great difficulty, for instance, in getting servants, and then, after a year or two, Rose, an old servant who'd been with us in Dalston, insisted on leaving without any explanation. This made Mr. Furnivall very angry. The next one had no complaints to make, so he insisted that we should dispense with a second servant. He said that we'd spent so much money coming into the house that it was our duty to economize, and really I'd no objection to that, because there's nothing like work for filling your mind. She's still with us. She's one of the lucky ones like Mr. Furnivall. She's been with us 13 years, and we feel that it's better to put up with her temper than to run the risk of... well, you know what I mean. Of course I was unlucky. From the moment that we came into the house, I began to have experiences. Nothing of the kind that have happened since, but still experiences that were disturbing until you got used to them. The things that had driven poor Rose, that was our housemaid, away. Within a week or two, I'd realized that we had company. I mean that ours were not the only spirits in the house. At first it gave me a great fright to see a woman dressed like a nun coming down the stairs, and a strange man with a cassock in the kitchen passage. Of course it was frightening, but it soon became clear that I was the only person who saw them, and that they, poor things, were just as harmless as shadows. When I told Mr. Furnivall, he was only amused. He said they were heirlooms and increased the value of the house. Some years later, my eldest daughter, Guinevere, told me that she had often seen them too, but had been afraid to mention it because she knew that her father would laugh at her. It's such a pity. The children were always afraid of him, but I suppose that's often the case, and Mr. Furnivall hasn't always lived, as they say, in a world... and Mr. Furnivall has always lived, as they say, in a world of his own. Still, my heart bled for poor Gwen when she told me. It's unjust, isn't it, that a child should experience such strange things? She told me that she and Elaine had names for all of them, under which they used to mention them in their prayers. Pathetic, isn't it? Enid hadn't come to us at that time. Did I mention her before? I don't believe I did. She was my little stepsister who came to live with us when her poor mother died. Of course I felt like a mother toward her myself, and Mr. Furnivall was devoted to her, too, almost more than to our own. Yes, She was one of the lucky ones. Now I've gone and lost the thread. My memory's dreadful nowadays. The phantoms? Ah, yes, how stupid of me. After a time, I grew so used to them that now when I meet them, I take them quite as a matter of course. What I never could get used to, and never shall, was the feeling of other presences behind all this, presences and influences too. I'm afraid I'm not clever enough to express it. Mr. Furnival could do so in a moment, but then he, of course, has never felt them. After a bit we began to have visitors in the house, and then I knew how real they were. You might have thought that it would make it easier to know that I wasn't going mad, as I'd often thought I was. You don't think I'm mad, do you? But it didn't. It just proved that I wasn't. It couldn't be possible that half our visitors were going out of their senses. I was almost thankful when Mr. Furnival and the Low Church clergyman at the vicarage quarrelled, and he decided to give the living to Mr. Low, who understood our ways. The man who left was really a very unpleasant person apart from his beliefs. He left the vicarage in a dreadful state, and as he hadn't any money, Mr. Furnival generously paid for all the dilapidations. While the repairs were going on, Mr. Low came to stay with us in this house. That was the time when Jerry began his tricks. I expect it sounds irreverent to talk of a spirit like that, but we're so used to him now, and he really is so harmless, that it seems quite natural. It's just like having a defective and mischievous child in the house. We don't really take him seriously. You see, it isn't as if he were our own. But, of course, it was very trying for the dear abbot, Mr. Low, I mean, and for poor Miss Hemus. You remember the story about the watch? It got on her nerves so much that she had to leave us, and after she'd gone we never heard a word from her. I often think of her, and wonder where she is. But that's what happens. When once people have gone from us, they don't seem ever to want to think of Cold Harbour. They pass right out of our lives. Yes, I'm forgetting. Miss Hemus had some sort of disagreement with Mr. Furnival. She wouldn't tell me what it was about. Education, I expect. That's a thing in which I don't consider myself qualified to interfere. But that's another funny thing. Part of the influence of the house. It does, actually, seem to make people fall out with one another. Isn't that dreadful? Don't you think so? Let me see, where was I? Oh, Mr. Low, of course. I don't think Jerry's antics seriously upset him, though he was the person who had started them. Of course, they were an inconvenience to him, but he was a man of very strong faith, and bore them with great dignity, and if that had been all, I think he would have held on till the end. The terrible thing was that the more he despised him, the more outrageous Jerry became. Mr. Furnival thought it all a joke, and I'm sure that was the right attitude, in a way, for all our sakes, though poor Mr. Low couldn't see it. And then one day, Mr. Furnival came to me in this very room, and sat down in the chair that you're sitting in. "Mrs. Furnival," he said, "I can't go on being hag-ridden in this manner. I've come to the end of my tether. I thought that I was secure in the armour of light, but I was mistaken. I've now reached a point where I can't stay another night in this house." It came as an awful shock to me, my dear, because I'd been counting so much on his goodness and strength as a support to myself. I begged him to reconsider, but it wasn't a bit of good. "No, Mrs. Furnival," he said, "I've made up my mind. I've come to the conclusion that the salvation of my soul is at stake. The risk is too great, and if you take my advice, you'll do the same. It's your duty to yourself and your children to leave Cold Harbour." I told him that that was quite out of the question, that we'd only just moved in, at an enormous expense, and that I knew Mr. Furnival was devoted to the place, and wouldn't listen to the idea for a moment. "That's what I feared," he said, "and in some ways that appears to me the most terrible feature of the affair. Mr. Furnival declares that he feels nothing, and I believe he speaks the truth. why he feels nothing when all the rest of us are weighted down with horror. Because they won't let him, Mrs. Furnivall, because he, poor man, is already in their power. I saw there was no moving him. Well, Mr. Lowe, I said, we must do the best we can. I'll try to put up a bed for you somewhere in the vicarage. It'll have to be downstairs, for the paper hangers haven't finished with the bedrooms. He shook his head. The poor man's eyes were full of tears. No, Mrs. Furnivall, he said, that's no good. I shall never live in the vicarage. I'm going to retreat near Oxford. This morning I wrote a letter to Mr. Furnivall resigning the living. I've told you that my soul is not safe here within the... now what did he call it? The radius of the house's activity. Even in the church itself I'm not safe, he said. I asked him what he meant. It seemed such a terrible thing to say. You're forcing me to confess my own degradation, he said. Well, it's best that you should know the worst. This is the truth. During the whole of the last week, I have felt this evil influence growing on me, and now, to my shame, the devil has got the better of me. Of me, Mrs. Furnivall, a priest in holy orders. For the last 36 hours I've been unable to pray. After that he broke down completely. I tried to comfort him, but what could I do? Let's pray together, Mr. Lowe, I said. When 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name. God bless you, Mrs. Furnivall, he said. You're stronger than I am. Of course it wasn't true, for Mr. Lowe was a real saint, but we knelt down together on the hearthrug there, with no sound but the clock ticking in the corner, just as it is now. And after a few moments up he jumped. It's no good, he said. It's no good. I am lost. How can I expect to pray in this accursed place when even the church will not protect me? I must go at once. I've left the letter to your husband in my bedroom. Will you be kind enough to give it to him? I promised to do so. I didn't know what I was saying. His face was so truly terrible. And he went. He went straight out of that door, and I never saw him again. We heard that he went on a mission to Africa, the university's mission, I think they call it, and died of blackwater fever some years later. But don't you think that is dreadful? Perfectly dreadful? She waited for me to answer, and naturally I could only say that it was. In the interval, she had sat perched on her poof, with her soft hands clasped in front of her, and a face that was absolutely blank with misery. I forced myself to break the silence. That letter, I said, was the one from which Mr. Furnivall was quoting just now? Yes, she answered. That was the one. Mr. Furnivall was positively enraged by it. You see, he couldn't understand. It wasn't really his fault. And he wrote Mr. Lowe a violent, scathing letter in reply, which Mr. Lowe acknowledged. Then Mr. Furnivall sent the correspondence to the bishop. But what could the bishop do? It is dreadful, isn't it? But not as dreadful, not nearly as dreadful as what followed. Miss Harrow. Old Dr. Harrow was the rector of Lapton, you know. Dear, dear, I'm forgetting Muriel. She was a second cousin of Mr. Furnivall's. Such a dear. You can't imagine what a relief it was to me to have another lady with me in the house. It was a pleasure to see her here with her high spirits, joking all the time with Mr. Furnivall, who's always at his very best when young girls are about. I loved watching them together, and yet, from the moment I arrived, I was frightened to think how they would receive her. Fortunately, it seemed as though she were going to be one of the lucky ones, and everything went quite well until the following Sunday. I ought to have told you that, after his disappointment in poor Mr. Lowe, Mr. Furnivall took no steps to fill the living. He made arrangements with the rector of Halesby to send over his curate to Cold Harbour twice a week for the necessary services. Well, Muriel went to church in the ordinary way on Sunday morning. Of course, Mr. Furnivall and myself had driven over to Starton for early service before breakfast, as we always did, but Muriel had been brought up in a very Protestant household, and went to communicate here. For some reason or other, I stayed at home that morning. When she came back, I was arranging the flowers on the table over there. Of course, from the moment she entered, I saw that there was something the matter. She was in a state of such violent feeling that she could hardly speak. "Aunt Jane," she said, "I want to speak with you." "Yes, my dear," I said. For the moment I thought that Mr. Furnival had said something to her that shocked her. He's so naughty, you know, and sometimes says things that seem outrageous to women in a joking way. But that wasn't it, unfortunately. "Auntie," she said, "you know I wanted to stay to communion. All through this service this morning I felt something queer. I thought I should have to go out, but Cousin Humphrey persuaded me to stay. Then, at the end, just when I was on the point of taking the Holy Sacrament, I couldn't. Oh, I wish I could tell you how deeply I felt for her. 'My dear Muriel,' I said, 'what on earth do you mean?' 'I mean that I couldn't,' she said, quite sharply. Just as the priest held the paten in front of me, it was as if something black, came between me and the elements. I couldn't touch it, and he passed on in front of me. What will he think of me, Auntie, and what can it mean?' I tried to console her. 'You must have had a little fainting fit, Muriel,' I said. 'No, no, Auntie,' she said, 'it wasn't that. It's worse than that. I know that I shall never be able to communicate again. It was the devil, Auntie, and he's stronger than God. What's more, I don't believe there is a God.' 'Oh, Muriel,' I said, 'you can't, you mustn't say such dreadful things.' But she went off, laughing, and from that day to this the poor child has been an absolute infidel. Now, isn't that dreadful? Don't you think it's perfectly dreadful?" By this time I was beginning to sit up. At first I'd felt, as I've told you, that the poor thing's brain was touched, and that I'd have to put up with her ramblings. But she didn't ramble. The whole story that she went on pouring out was so connected and clear, and the way that she told it so steady and matter-of-fact, that my head began to whirl. I wished to goodness she'd come to an end of it and take me back to Ronald. I looked about me for an excuse. Those manuscripts of Martock's. But now that she'd got me, she evidently meant to stick to me. "Don't you think it's perfectly dreadful?" she said again. I had to answer her. She waited so pathetically for a reply. "To say the least of it," I admitted, "it was very strange." "But your own children," I said, "were they affected in the same way?" She sighed. "I'm coming to them," she said quietly. "In one way or another they were all unlucky, all except dear Enid, thank God. Fortunately, soon after we came here, I persuaded Mr. Furnival to send Gareth away to school. Naturally, he had to come back for the holidays, and I suppose it was then that they got hold of him. I shall never believe that his own nature was wicked. Never. It's a very tragic story, my dear. He brought disgrace on us. If you don't mind, I'd rather not speak of it. And please, please don't mention his name to Mr. Furnival, or refer to him in any way." I promised her that I wouldn't. "When Gareth went to school," she went on, "I was left at home with the 3 little girls. I think I've told you already that they were just as conscious as I was of the bad things in the house, and that they kept it all to themselves. The only thing we ever talked about was Jerry. Of course, we couldn't attempt to conceal him. But the others... You see, the poor mites didn't know that we knew about them. The poor mites didn't know that we knew about him. They went on living in a dreadful little world of their own, and that was so bad for them. I mean that it made them secretive and strange, not like ordinary children, and as Mr. Furnival could never bear to have his studies interrupted by their noise, they used to go about the place like little ghosts themselves, whispering to each other in corners. When I realized, later on, how this dreadful blight had lain over all their childhood, I could have died with pity. And yet I had thought, all the time, that I was acting for the best. And it was no good consulting Mr. Furnival about it. He wouldn't believe a word I said." She waited, as though she were anxious for some confirmation, and I hastened to assure her that she could not be blamed. "It's sweet of you to say that, my dear," she said. "You see, it was not until Gwen was 15 that I had any idea that they knew. I suppose that the dear innocents imagined that all human life was like life at Cold Harbour. They couldn't make comparisons. We never went away to the sea in the summer like other people. I didn't dare to leave Mr. Furnivall alone at the mercy of them, so to speak, and he became more and more wrapped up in Cold Harbour every year. The only times at which I left the house were those when I went up to London on business or shopping excursions. I used to catch an early train at the junction and return the same night. In the winter, of course, that meant starting before it was light, and Gwen, who was a perfect little housewife, used to come into our room and call me at 6 o'clock in case I overslept. Mr. Furnivall never wakes before 8. He's a very heavy sleeper. You see, he has nothing on his mind. It's wonderful for him, isn't it? Well, one morning about 10 years ago, yes, that must have been right, for I know that Gwen was 15 then, and now she's nearly 26, I planned to run up to town for the day and do some Christmas shopping. When you have children, particularly in a house like this, you do feel that Christmas should be made a festival of brightness, and Mr. Furnivall loves all the old customs too. You've no idea how dreadfully dark this place is at that time of year. What with the smoke and that, we often never see the sun for weeks at a time. And at 6:30 in the morning, which was the time you have to start for the junction if you want to get back the same evening, it's just so dark that you'd think you were at the North Pole. So I always used to get Gwen to run along and make sure I was awake at 5:30. That morning, luckily, I woke early and lay in bed waiting for Gwen to come and thinking over my shopping list. I looked at my little travelling clock and saw that it was 5:30, but I didn't get up. I thought it would spoil Gwen's pleasure if she came in and found that I had waked by myself, so I went on lying there till 20 to 6, and then, of course, I knew that I couldn't waste any more time if I were to catch the train. So I just crawled out of bed and lit a candle and began to dress very quietly so as not to disturb Mr. Furnivall. It makes him cross to be wakened, as you can imagine, when there's no need for it. So the time went on. By 6 o'clock I'd finished dressing, and still no Gwen. I had plenty of time to spare, so I thought I'd give the children a surprise by making an early cup of tea and taking it up to their room. I was just on the point of going downstairs to the kitchen when Gwen arrived. At that moment my back was turned to her, and anyhow it was too dark to see her face, but, of course, I knew it was she. "Is that you, Gwen, darling?" I said. "Do you know it's only just on 6? I couldn't wait for you any longer. Did you oversleep?" "No, mother, dear," she said. "I didn't oversleep. I woke at 5 o'clock. "Then why didn't you call me, darling?" I said. I turned and saw her standing in the doorway, such a poor, white, shriveled little thing. I knew at once that something was wrong, and guessed the reason, but of course it wouldn't have done to admit it. "I couldn't come, Mother," she said. "I'm awfully sorry, but I couldn't." I went over to her and kissed her. "My dear child," I said, "it's nonsense to say you couldn't if you were awake at 5. Her little face was like ice. I could feel how cold her body was through her nightdress, and when I put my arms round her, she gave way entirely and began to sob so loudly that I had to beg her not to wake Mr. Furnivall. "What is it, my darling?" I said. "Tell me why you couldn't come." It seemed for a moment as if she wasn't able to form the words. She just went on wailing. "I couldn't, Mother, I couldn't." My own heart went as cold as her poor little body. I led her out into the passage for Mr. Furnivall's sake, and there, at last, I managed to get her to tell me. "You won't believe me, Mother darling," she said, "but it's true. I couldn't come to you because there was a dead body, all covered with blood, lying on the carpet between me and the door. Then she began to cry again. Of course I tried to persuade her that she had imagined all this. I said she must have been dreaming and things like that. But I knew in my heart that she was speaking the truth. By that time I should have taken the awful things she'd seen almost as a matter of course. I was getting used to them, you see, but I'd no idea, until that moment, that the children were suffering in the same way. That was what upset me, and though I didn't think it wise or right to ask her there and then if she'd had experiences of that kind before, I knew quite well that she had. For the thing that upset her wasn't so much the awfulness of the apparition itself, as the fear that I should be cross with her. You can see what that meant, can't you? Oh, it was dreadful. I couldn't bear to think of leaving her to go to the station, but I knew it would never do to take her seriously. So I just told her again that she'd evidently had a nightmare, and that, of course, I wasn't in the least bit angry with her. And all the time that I was doing this, I could see by her eyes that she was only pretending to agree with me, and that her little brain was full of all sorts of secret horrors that she determined to keep to herself. I was lying to her, and she knew it and was condoning my lies, and I felt that this agreement actually separated us, and that we could never be quite natural with each other again. If you had children of your own, you'd realize how perfectly dreadful that was. Dear, dear, I shall always remember that awful day's shopping in London. I don't know how I ever got through it, because all the time that I wandered about Harrods, buying things like crackers, I was wondering, hoping against hope, that the other poor darlings had escaped. I kept asking myself whether it wasn't my duty to try and find out, and yet I couldn't bear to think of putting any idea of the kind into their minds. Even if they hadn't seen anything, I wondered if Gwen had told them, but of course I knew that it would never do to ask Gwen if she had. That would have implied that I believed her, and I'd quite determined never to admit that. So it went on and on. Gwen never spoke another word, and I used to try to persuade myself that what she'd told me on that morning was just an isolated incident. I used to watch the children playing. It comforted me to see that they seemed quite normal and happy, and when the days began to lengthen I felt more contented, for then they all ran wild about the lanes and were able to escape from the house. As far as I was concerned, the spring made no difference. It used to cut me to the heart to see the way Mr. Furnivall went about the making of the garden. Even when the beds were full of flowers, they seemed sad to me. I used to go out in the evening with him to look at his roses, and every one of them seemed to me alive. Of course they were alive, that's silly. It seemed to be looking sideways at things that were there and that we couldn't see. Like dogs, you know. Mr. Furnivall would never have a dog in the house, and when people brought their dogs here, you could see that they hated it. It was a wonderful summer that year. All through the first half of June there was no rain, and the children were getting so used to living out of doors that they begged me to be allowed to sleep in hammocks on the lawn. Of course, I was only too glad of the excuse to get them outside the house at night, when things generally happen, but Mr. Furnivall was all against the idea. He would be, naturally. He's very conservative in his ideas of religion and politics and everything else. But though he's often so stern with the children, and says harsh things about them to tease me, he's really so tender-hearted that he never refuses anything in reason. Apart from leaving Cold Harbour, you understand, but that, poor darling, isn't his fault. They do say, I know, that it is not good for the nerves to sleep in the moonlight, but that always seemed to me superstition. You mustn't think, from what I'm telling you, that I'm a fanciful woman in the ordinary sense. I'm not. Anyhow, we decided that all three of them, Gwen, Elaine, and Enid, should have their little hammocks hung out on the lawn in front of the house. They were all very excited about it. They'd never done anything of the kind before. It was just a jolly new adventure for them. About 9 o'clock, I went out and kissed them good night, or rather, I kissed Gwen. The other two were asleep already. "If you get nervous, darling," I said, "you must call me." "Oh, I shan't be nervous here, dearest, she said. It was only in little allusions of this kind that we ever came near to the subject, and in spite of that she seemed so happy that I went to bed quite contented, and fell asleep almost at once so soundly that I never heard Mr. Furnival come up an hour later. Just after midnight I woke for no particular reason. I lay wide awake for about 5 minutes, wondering why. Then, all of a sudden, I heard a most dreadful scream. I knew it was one of the children, so I jumped out of bed and ran out to the lawn. They were there, all 3 of them. My poor little sister was crying by herself, while Gwen was trying to comfort Elaine in her sweet, motherly way. That poor child, Elaine, I mean, was almost dead with fright. "She's seen something, mother," said Gwen. "She's had a horrid dream about blood. She thought she saw blood gushing out of the front of the house." Then the most curious thing happened. Elaine, who was in the ordinary way the sweetest and gentlest creature, flew into the most dreadful passion and hit Gwen in the face. I never saw a child so transported. "I didn't dream it, Gwen," she screamed. "You know I didn't. I saw it. I saw it with my own eyes open. She's a liar, mother. She knows I saw it." Really, I didn't know what to do with them. All 3 of them were crying. Elaine was struggling like a little mad cat in my arms, and kept on saying the most dreadful things about poor Gwen, words that I'd never even suspected that she knew at her age. I had to be quite stern with her, though. She was nearly stiff with fright. I took them all into the house. Elaine had been shouting so loudly that she'd woken Mr. Furnival, and of course he didn't mend matters by saying, "I told you so," though really he was quite justified. When things had quieted down a little, I took Elaine into my bed, and there she lay beside me, still cold and stiff. She never slept a wink that night. Now don't you think that was dreadful?" she ended breathlessly. "You see, all the way through from the very first," she went on, "that there had been some element of blood in the things you see. Once I arranged with a friend of mine to send a medium over here, a friend of hers, a medium, down here for a bit, and she said just the same. 'Blood,' she said. 'In this house, Mrs. Furnival, I can see nothing but blood.' And later, of course. But Gladys Harrow. I haven't told you about Gladys, have I? Oh, well, there are so many. You can't remember things in order. She was the granddaughter of old Dr. Harrow, the rector of Lapton, down in Devonshire. It was no sort of life for her at Lapton. You see, her grandfather was nearly 94, in spite of the damp, when he died. The rectory was in a dreadful state of disrepair, and so gloomily furnished that we used to invite Gladys out to the farm with us. Mr. Furnival took a fancy to her, and treated her almost like a daughter. But then we left Lapton, and in the change and confusion she sort of dropped out of our lives, until, one day, we had a letter from her to say that she was taking up a gymnastic training at some college for ladies near North Bromwich. Of course, we were both delighted. Mr. Furnival loves to have young people about the place, and I knew it would be a great treat for me, too, because, since we'd been to Cold Harbour, I'd scarcely seen a soul. I couldn't call on people who had been rude to Mr. Furnival, but that's beside the point. We invited Gladys to come over for a long weekend at her half-term. She was so strong and healthy and full of spirits that it was a treat to see her. She'd always been an athletic, daring sort of girl, ready to ride bareback or walk over to Dartmoor by moonlight, or go out swimming in Start Bay. I think that was what Mr. Furnival liked about her. He loves a tomboy. Even in the old days at Lapton, he was always daring her to do some mad thing or other, and, what's more, she wasn't often beaten. Well, that evening, those two started their old games, Gladys challenging Mr. Furnivall to perform all sorts of complicated gymnastic movements which seemed quite outrageous for a man of his age. But you've no idea how strong and supple he is. I wish I could say the same for myself. I watched them performing here in this room, and all the time I was wondering if Gladys was one of the lucky ones or not. Whenever we had visitors, that was the first thought that came into my mind, but in this case, somehow, there seemed so little to fear that I decided not to warn her, particularly as I'd put her to sleep in the room under Mr. Furnivall's study, in the new part of the house. When she came down to breakfast on Saturday morning, I asked her how she'd slept, and she answered with the queerest sort of look. "Oh, all right, thank you," she said, "but I wish Mr. Furnivall hadn't spent the night walking to and fro in the study above my head." When she said that, Mr. Furnivall burst out laughing, and told her that he'd gone to bed 10 minutes later than herself, and slept soundly the whole night. I wished, in a way, he hadn't told her, but of course it was quite true, and afterwards we said no more about it. But the next morning, Sunday that was, she didn't wait to be asked. She turned on him right away. "I bet you're trying to frighten me," she said, "but you needn't think you can do that." I asked her what had happened. "Happened?" she said. "Why, Mrs. Furnivall, he's been moving the furniture about all night. I think he might put off his spring cleaning until my bedroom's empty. I could fall asleep this minute. I felt that it was now really time to say something, but Mr. Furnivall gave me a look that stopped me. "You must have imagined it, Gladys," he said, and that quite upset her. I suppose the poor child was irritable with want of sleep. "Imagined it?" she said. "I'm not imaginative. You know I'm not. What's more, if you do it again tonight, I shall come upstairs and catch you out." "All right, Gladys, that's a bargain," he said, turning the whole thing into a joke. But I knew it wasn't a joke. All that night I'd been worrying about her. I had guessed, by that time, that she was one of the unlucky ones, and as I lay there in the dark, I heard Mr. Furnivall tossing from side to side in his own bed, and so knew for certain that he had nothing to do with it. During the morning I suggested that I should change Gladys's bedroom, but she wouldn't hear of it. "You needn't think I'm frightened," she said. It would really be rather a point of honor with her not to be. That evening there was a moon. After Sunday supper, Gladys and Mr. Furnivall went for a moonlight walk in the lanes. I stood there waiting for them till close to 10 o'clock, and when I heard them come into the hall, I went down to scold them for being out so late. Gladys looked so pale and tired that I advised her to go to bed at once. "I think I'd better," she said. "I slept so badly last night. No more tricks now," she said, pointing her finger at Mr. Furnivall. He laughed and shook his head. Then he kissed her good night, as he always did, having known her since she was almost a child, and she went upstairs. I waited with him in the hall, watching him unlace his boots. There was a knot in one of the laces, and the light was so bad, just candles, you know, that he couldn't see to undo it. So I went down on my knees to help him with it. He's so impatient when a thing like that thwarts him. He only loses his temper and makes it worse. There was I, on my knees, just saying that I hoped to goodness they'd leave poor Gladys alone that night, when we heard a most dreadful scream, and a moment later Gladys herself came flying downstairs like a whirlwind. "Has it torn me?" she cried. "Has it torn my face? Has it? I know it's drawn blood." She kept her hand up to the right side of her cheek so that I couldn't answer her. Mr. Furnivall got up in his stockings and took hold of her arm to steady her, but she seemed as if she couldn't bear him to touch her. Don't, she screamed. "Can't you leave me alone?" Oh dear, I can't possibly tell you how horrible it all was, to see that fine, strong, self-reliant girl reduced within 5 minutes to a state of terror bordering on madness. For that's what it was. At last I managed to drag her hand away from her cheek. It wasn't torn, as she had imagined, but the skin was all red and inflamed, and you could just make out 4 long streaks, as if it had been scratched by fingernails. "It is torn, I know it is," she said. We could do nothing with her. She cried and laughed so dreadfully. She implored me to take her away, right away out of the house, and really I don't know what would have happened to her reason if we hadn't done so. I hope I shall never see a human face so deformed by terror again. It was awkward, too. The vicarage had been empty for more than a year. There was nowhere to take her, except the Fox, and I knew that the Higginses went to bed at 9 o'clock. Besides, it seemed so strange to take one of our guests there to sleep at that time of night. We'd always been so anxious that the local people shouldn't have anything to talk about. But there was simply nothing else to be done. Mr. Furnival volunteered at once to take her along to the inn, but that made her lose all control again. She seemed to have it firmly fixed in her mind that he had something to do with it, and clung to me so desperately that I had to go with her myself, and explain things as best as I could to Mrs. Higgins. Heaven only knows what they thought of it, but, luckily, by the time we had reached the Fox she had quieted down a little, and I was able to tell them some lie or other, much as I hated doing it. At first she begged me to sleep with her, but about midnight she allowed me to return. I promised to send her things over to the inn next morning. She'd quite determined to go back to college on Monday. "I couldn't bear to see that dreadful house again," she said, and, of course, I quite sympathized with her. Poor child, she was such a fresh, bright creature, and we both loved her so. We've never seen her again, nor heard from her to this day. That is what usually happens. But don't you think that it was perfectly dreadful?" Mrs. Furnival stared at me with those puzzled, entreating eyes. This time I couldn't answer her. I could only let her clasp my hand, and she clung to it in a way that nearly made me cry. There wasn't much to choose between us in that way. It was quite a relief to both of us when she went on. "By that time," she said, "I had realized that I couldn't keep my reason if I went on fighting in the dark. I think I should have lost it a long time before if it hadn't been for the support which my religion gave me. Poor Mr. Lowe had been a great help, but when they'd driven him away, I felt too dreadfully unprotected. His going had been a great blow to Mr. Furnival, too. I think I told you that he shut up the vicarage and arranged with the rector of Halesby to send his curate over twice a week, but the curate, I'm afraid, was a young man without vocation, in whom one couldn't really confide. Then came the fire at the vicarage. I don't think I told you about that. Mr. Furnival believes it was caused by some tramp getting in through one of the kitchen windows. That may be so, but anyhow, it made the place so uninhabitable that he couldn't afford to have it put right again, and so there was no more question of having a resident priest, which made things worse than ever for me. The struggle seemed endless, and little by little I began to lose the power of praying, just as Mr. Lowe and Muriel had done. So, in despair, I went one day to the oratory in North Bromwich, and had a talk with Father Westinghouse. That really seemed to give me the courage and faith that I wanted. I felt that I must have something strong and definite to support me, and thanks to him, I became a convert to the faith. Father Westinghouse was just on the point of leaving, but he put me in touch with the abbot at St. Chad's, who took charge of my initiation. Mr. Furnival was furious. I can't tell you how furious he was. That was the first and only difference we had ever known in all our married life. I am still puzzled to think why he should have felt it so keenly. You see, he himself is a most devout Anglo-Catholic. He told me times without number that he considers the Reformation the greatest blow that Christianity has ever suffered in England, and yet there's a point beyond which he seems unable to go. It's a curious thing in a man who is so truly good as he is, and one who prides himself on being so thoroughly logical. But there it is. I sometimes wonder if they have if they have anything to do with it. I know him so well that I can't believe his real self capable of the cruelty that he showed to me about my conversion. Still, that's a long time ago, and now he knows that I can never change back again. I think he's reconciled to it, though he's often dreadfully rude to me before strangers. I'm afraid you noticed that, but you mustn't think badly of him. And I can't tell you the new strength and happiness it gave me. Of course, I should have been happier still if he had allowed me to bring up the children in the faith, but I knew that was out of the question. Little by little, we began to go our own ways in matters of religion. He's too much in sympathy with what you might call the decorative side of religion, that he made no objections when I fitted up, with our own money, a little oratory in a recess at the top of the house. And though he pretended to laugh at it, he actually made me a present of a beautiful Byzantine crystal chalice, which shows how soft his heart is beneath all his scoffing. My little oratory was a great joy to me. Whenever I was too terrified, or felt my reason shaking, I used to go there and pray. It was the one place in the world where I felt myself really safe, and, indeed, about that time, I needed all the support I could find. That summer I lost my little boy, Gowan. He was only 11. Appendicitis. I don't think they understood the disease in those days as well as they do now. You see, Mr. Furnival is a great believer in homeopathy, and, as the doctors told me afterwards, appendicitis isn't a thing that yields to that sort of treatment. They operated on him in North Bromwich. Mr. Lloyd Moore was a very great surgeon, they tell me, but he came in just too late. It was the first blow of that kind that we'd ever had. For a time I simply couldn't believe it. It just stunned me. But now I sometimes wonder if it wasn't a dispensation of Providence that he should have been taken away before all these dreadful influences had a chance of playing on him as they did on poor dear Gareth. That came a few months later. He was expelled from school for a reason that's too terrible to mention. Mr. Furnival is so very strict in moral matters that he would have nothing more to do with him. He even refused to let him come home again. I suppose from the strictly moral point of view he was right, and yet I always feel that whatever wickedness Gareth must have committed, it wasn't entirely his fault. I'm convinced that they had something to do with it. The boy wasn't naturally wicked. Nothing but the evil, corrupting influence of this place could have made him do what he did. He went into the army as a common soldier. 5 years later we heard that he had died of sunstroke in India. I often go into his room. You mustn't mind if I cry a little. 2 in 1 year. Oh, how it broke me. I think even Mr. Furnival began to realize then that nothing but my conversion could have saved my reason. In speech he was always still very harsh about it, but you can see for yourself what a kind heart he has behind his prejudices. He allowed me to ask the abbot to come over and to dedicate my oratory. He came with his chaplain and brought a consecrated altar with him. That was a great joy to me, although naturally I was a little anxious to see how Mr. Furnival would behave to him. As a matter of fact, I needn't have been nervous. Nothing can make a more charming host. Nobody can make a more charming host than Mr. Furnival when he's a mind to, and he was delightful to both of them. At night, he and Father Vincent used to sit up in the study discussing questions of ritual and tradition that were far too deep for me in my poor dazed condition. The abbot told me himself, in so many words, that Mr. Furnival's was the most remarkable brain he had met in years. I can't tell you the confidence that the presence of such a holy man in the house gave me, until, I think it was on the second morning. Then he took me aside and told me solemnly that all the things I'd said to him about the house were true. It was too ghastly to hear him repeating, word for word, everything that poor Mr. Lowe had said years before. You'll hardly believe it when I tell you that he, too, found it difficult to pray, and that if ever there were a saint on earth, he was one. There's no doubt in my mind, he said, but that this house is in the possession of evil forces. I have made an attempt to exorcise them in the usual way, but must confess to you that I have failed. I've failed, Mrs. Furnivall, he said, and all that I can do is to advise you most solemnly, as you value the salvation of your immortal soul, to leave this place. In that case, I told him, I must leave my husband. Surely you would not advise me to do that? I believe that that is your duty, he said. I put it to him. Wouldn't it be worse than cowardice, I said, to desert the man I loved and my sweet children, for Mr. Furnivall would never let them go, to leave them exposed to the most awful spiritual danger while I saved myself? He only shook his head. In that case, he said, I'm sorry to tell you that I myself dare not run the risk of staying here another night. I've used every power that the Church has placed in my hands. I've failed, and it would be presumptuous on my part to continue to fight this battle with weapons of my own choosing. As it is, I shall feel bound to undergo a long penance after contact with influences so impure. I pressed him to advise me, but he wouldn't. He'd spoken his final word. At any rate, Reverend Father, I said, you will do me one favor before you go, and that is to say Mass in the oratory for the last time. I can't refuse you that, he said. I only hope, dear daughter, that the Blessed Virgin will open your eyes to the peril against which I have warned you. I'm afraid that I can do nothing with your husband. His heart is so full of heresy and pride that no word of mine can soften it. But, if you like, I will tell him what advice I have given to you. Of course, I knew that this would only lead to disaster, so I begged him not to. An hour later, we all went up to my little oratory to celebrate Mass, Father Vincent, his chaplain, and myself. I took the opportunity of a moment when Mr. Furnivall was out of the house. You see, although he was far too considerate to make any fuss, I knew that it would irritate him. I remember going upstairs, so full of peace and hope, in spite of what the abbot had told me, for really it did seem as if the consecration of that little oratory had sweetened the whole house. I knelt down and prayed that it might always be so, while Father Vincent and his chaplain prepared the elements. It seemed as if they were taking an unusually long time over it, but that didn't trouble me. In the middle of one of my prayers I heard a little cracking sound, but I took no notice of it and didn't open my eyes. Then Father Vincent came over and touched my shoulder. I can hear the sound of his voice at this very moment. Mass cannot be said this morning, he said. You had better go. The chalice has broken in my hands. Now, don't you think that was dreadful? Perfectly dreadful? No, dreadful isn't the word. There's no word for it. And that was how he felt, too. You could see it in his face. Then suddenly my feelings changed. It seemed to me like a direct challenge from all that I'd been fighting against for 3 years, and I knew that I'd got to accept. I spoke to him quite sharply, forgetting for the moment where I was and what he was. I said, "If you'll wait a moment, Reverend Father, I'll see if I can mend it. We simply can't give in like this." And that, in spite of my boldness, which he'd every right to resent, seemed to hearten him. "Very well," he said, "I'll hold the chalice till you come back, but don't be too long away." So I ran back down to Mr. Furnivall's study, and found a stick of sealing wax and a box of matches. It was only the base of the chalice that had snapped off in his fingers, and luckily none of the wine was spilt, so, when I came back, he and the chaplain were able to mend it between them, and go through the holy office to the end. Perhaps it was only nervousness that made his hands tremble, some curious strain, you know. But in spite of my feeling that we had turned a defeat into a great victory, I couldn't get him to stay in the house any longer. No doubt he was right. He had done everything that the church ordained. But though he continued to advise me by letter, he never came to Cold Harbour again. I sometimes think it was only because of his outstanding saintliness that the evil powers made their efforts against him. I suppose a great saint has to withstand the greatest temptations, and after that victory my little oratory seemed to me a greater refuge than ever. She broke off suddenly. It was curious. I couldn't be certain whether she'd lost the thread again or finished. Then I guessed that she was praying, and I didn't dare to disturb her. At last I ventured to ask if that were the end. "The end?" she said. "Oh, no, there is no end to it. That happened nearly 11 years ago. During that time I've had my share of purgatory. All through those years I had to watch the children growing up. That was a sorrow in itself. There couldn't be any happiness in this house. I tried to make things easy for them, but something was always bound to go wrong. I watched their natures changing, but I was quite powerless, and Mr. Furnival would only laugh at me when I told him that things were going wrong. Gwen and Elaine, the two unlucky ones, made most unsuitable marriages. It turned their father against him. He's so very particular in social matters, although he calls himself a socialist. I couldn't blame them. I knew they were quite justified in taking any step that would get them away from home. Unfortunately, neither marriage turned out happily. I'm afraid their early experiences had left their mark on them. You see, as the medium told us before her dreadful quarrel with Mr. Furnival, the influence of the house is definitely evil." "You've said that before," I told her. "I wish you'd explain what you meant by definitely evil." "It's evil," she repeated. "I can't say more." "But what do you mean?" I said. But do you mean," I said, "that it makes you want to do evil things yourself?" "Yes," she said, "that's what I do mean. I feel that some day I may do something really dreadful. I feel it more strongly every year, every day. Except for the blood, that is the worst part of it." "The blood?" I said. By this time, you see, she was getting rather incoherent. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she answered. "Of course you don't understand. My mind runs on so. I'm so used to it myself that I take it for granted that other people know. Naturally, living in an atmosphere of this kind, I wanted to learn as much about it as I could, and Mr. Furnival is really just as interested as I am. He has quite a number of books on the subject, his spook books, as he calls them, and when he is out of the house I sometimes creep up to his study and read them. In that way I found out that the thing most to be dreaded in these cases is what they call materializations. All the time I'd been congratulating myself that nothing of that kind had occurred, but during the last 2 years, it's come in just the form which might have been expected. The medium said that she felt blood all over the house. On several occasions the poor children have seen it, but during the last 18 months I've done more than that. I almost hesitate to tell you. I've not only seen it, I've touched it. Touched it! At this point the poor thing must have seen some shade of incredulity in my eyes. As a matter of fact, the conviction had suddenly come back to my mind that all the horrors she'd told me were just delusions. That was what Alma meant when she'd said that Mrs. Furnival was an invalid. The woman was mad. It was extraordinary, and quite in keeping, too, how she tumbled to my suspicions. Her voice lost that reasonable gentleness which had been so persuading. It became harsh and frightening. "Ah," she said, "you don't believe me. I'm only telling you the solemn truth. Everywhere in this house there's blood, actual blood, on my mirrors, on the carpets, everywhere. I spend half the day going about the house wiping it up." While she spoke I was thinking hard. I'm not quite a fool, you know, and this really was too steep. I pounced on her like anything. "This blood," I said. "Have you ever thought of having it analyzed?" "Analyzed?" she said. "But how could I get it analyzed?" "Your husband," I suggested, "could send it somewhere." "Oh, but I wouldn't dream of telling him," she cried. "I've given that up long ago. He gets so upset that now I know better than to mention anything. He thinks that all the trouble is over, and it's much, much better that he should think so, for he's quite incapable of seeing for himself." "If you can touch it," I said, "surely he can see it." "Oh, but I couldn't, she cried. "Well, I think, for your own sake," I said, "that he should be told." She shook her head piteously. "My dear, you don't know Mr. Furnival," she said, "and you don't realize the truth of what the medium declared, though I knew it quite well before she told me. And that is that it's all directed against him, and centers in him. He's so possessed by their influence that he's incapable of believing. That, as I've told you, is the most dreadful part of it." She moved away from me, her voice hardened again. I could see that my little scientific suggestion had made her mistrust me. "We'll talk no more about it," she said. "It's very kind of you to have listened to me so patiently. Wouldn't you like to see the house?" Of course, I said I'd be delighted, which wasn't true, for though I didn't believe in her materializations, I knew that I wasn't proof, by a long way, against the unpleasant feeling of the house. My cheeks were still burning, and I wanted dreadfully to get in touch with Ronald again. That feeling of separation, there seemed to be more in it than the brick walls or plaster panels. It was spiritual more than physical. I felt almost as if he were dead. It made me shiver, and then, during the last few minutes, the revelation of me to Mrs. Furnival, and Mr. Furnival to myself, had changed. The relation of me to Mrs. Furnival, and Mr. Furnival to myself, had changed. At the beginning of her story, even in spite of the extraordinary things she told me, I'd felt quite safe with her, but now the sudden change in her voice made me a bit scared of her company. I knew this was perfectly beastly of me. I was ashamed of it, and yet I couldn't help it. I felt, all the time, that any minute she might do or say something frightening and unaccountable. Even when she spoke kindly to me, her ideas seemed so incoherent that I felt she was talking and living on a different plane from myself, that her mind wasn't quite normally human like my own. Of course, it couldn't be, after all that. So we began to wander over the house together, and I hated every step of it. I wondered how I had ever been such a fool as to tell Ronald that I thought it could be made quite comfortable. Comfortable! Why, there wasn't a brick or panel of it that wasn't tainted. I thought, that must have been what Ronald meant when he looked at me so closely. What an innocent, insensitive little idiot I was not to see that for myself. If I had realized it, I should never have allowed myself to get separated from him like this. Anyway, there it was. I had landed myself and had to put up with it. Mrs. Furnival took my arm and led me along the passage. I think there must have been something wrong with her heart as well. The only sound that I could hear was a sort of wheezing when she breathed. The corridor was simply beastly, but not nearly so horrible as the rooms. The first one she showed me was empty, with all the furniture draped in yellowish dust sheets. Only a nail over the head of the bed, on a nail over the head of the bed hung a football cap with a tarnished tassel. This was Garrett's, she said. The room's never been used since his day. Then why on earth, I wanted to say, haven't you cleaned it up and moved all of this ghastly furniture? But I couldn't speak, and after she'd stood there for a moment, glancing around and sighing to herself, she led me out of it and into another. This was the room, she said, in which poor dear Gwen saw the body on the floor. I had to look at the place where she'd pointed. I felt that I could have screamed out loud, but she just went on talking in the same placid, dazed, inconsequent way, and after a few minutes we escaped again into the passage, which now seemed quite homely and comfortable. She opened another room. "Now, isn't this a delightful room?" she said. "You see, it faces east, and on a summer morning the sun comes streaming in at this window." She hobbled over to the curtains and killed a clothes moth. Oof! That room, which she described as delightful, was really as dark and foul as a burial vault. "It has such charming memories," she said. "It was here that little Babs slept when dear Enid came to stay with us that summer. Such a darling little thing." It made me quite furious to imagine the crime of putting a child into such a sepulchre, and then it suddenly struck me that she'd never mentioned Enid's marriage. I told her so. "Enid? Ah, dear Enid," she said. "Enid is my little stepsister. Curious, isn't it? At my age, we do love her so. She was the only really lucky one of the whole family." I'd heard her say that before. Evidently she didn't remember that she'd told me. "I really don't think I could have gone on living here if it hadn't been for Enid's good luck. She was only 18 when she was married. So young, but such a nice man. Unfortunately, his profession compels him to live abroad. She's taken a cottage down in Devonshire, not far from Lapton. Of course, I should have loved to make a home for her here, but with a baby it wouldn't have been wise. It was so delightful to have them with me in the summer, and to see her still unaffected." She went on sighing over the charms of Enid and her baby as we climbed the stairs. But I wasn't thinking of the baby nor of Enid. Ever since we had left the room in which Gareth had been, how shall I put it, corrupted, and Gwen had seen the blood-stained corpse, my mind had been hot on a new trail, and just as she stood wheezing in the last step, I found myself blurting out, all of a sudden, "Mrs. Furnivall, do you sleep in the same room as your husband?" An extraordinary question. I knew, as I spoke, that she might easily have been offended. But she wasn't. She only stared at me mildly as she got her breath, and then said, with a faint, charming smile, "Well, I do and I don't. Our room is just over here on the right. I'll show you." Thank goodness, I thought, I haven't upset her. We entered the bedroom. It was long and low, with 2 windows that made it seem lighter than any of the others. Lighter and more possible. On the walls, print hangings of a pattern that I'd always loved. Now I can never bear to see it again. There were a pair of cold, chaste-looking little beds standing side by side, and between them, completely dividing the room into 2 when it was drawn, swung a thick brocaded curtain. "What on earth is this for?" I said. "Now you'll understand," she answered, "what I meant when I said that I do and I don't. This curtain, Mr. Furnivall always has it drawn at night. You see, he says I snore, and I dare say he's quite right, though I can't imagine that the curtain makes any difference. When he snores, I can hear him plainly. But then, I suppose it's his fancy, and it really makes no difference to the sense of companionship. I mean that if either of us were taken ill in the night, the other would be available, and it is a nice room, you know." I agreed with her, not because I thought it was anything but horrible, but because for the moment I set eyes on that sinister curtain. I was convinced, without taking the trouble to reason it out, that all the horrible things she told me were not directed against, but centered in, this man of whom she always spoke so tenderly. My mind went scurrying back through the incidents one by one, trying to find out how far Mr. Furnivall could establish his alibis, apart from this poor thing's evidence. I'll admit that I couldn't go very far. I was up against difficulties as soon as I started, but all the same I felt positive instinctively that I was right. "We've slept in this room for 15 years, I heard her saying. All through these dreadful troubles we've never been separated. I don't think there are many married people who can say as much as that." We passed out onto the landing again. I kept saying to myself, "I'm right. I know I'm right." She stood with her hand on the knob of another door. "This is the room," she said, "in which poor Mr. Lowe had such a bad time. We call it Jerry's room. You'd like to look inside it, wouldn't you?" As a matter of fact, I hated the idea. At this point, all my fear and distaste seemed to come to a climax. I knew that if I entered that room, something would happen. I couldn't imagine what. I didn't expect to have my face torn or anything like that. I just felt that if once that door were closed behind me, she might tell me something more horrible than anything that had gone before, or I might find myself trapped alone with Mr. Furnivall, or that, perhaps, she might take the opportunity of breaking down, or being affectionate to me, which would have been just as bad. And so I simply dug in my hind legs and stood still on the landing, while she gazed at me with her sad, puzzled eyes. I wouldn't give an inch, so, at last, she just opened the door a few inches, peeped inside it, and left it. "But I must show you my darling oratory," she said. And there I couldn't refuse her. It evidently meant so much to the poor thing. It stood at the top of another flight of stairs, wedged into a kind of triangle made by the slope of the gable, a little cupboard of a place with a heavy oak door. She went quickly up the stairs, in spite of her shortness of breath, and unlocked this door with a wrought iron key. I stood below her on the stairs. I could just see a light burning, and a crucifix with a painted plaster Christ, and down the stairs incense came drifting. "Yes, very nice," I forced myself to say. "Do come in and look at it. It's so sweet," she said. I couldn't. I simply couldn't. I can't explain myself. If I'd been able to reason, I could have told myself that this was the one place in the whole house that was absolutely free from sinister influences, so that I ought to have been thankful to enter it. But somehow I couldn't reason. That crucifix, so lifelike, so still. Do you know, it simply terrified me. I suppose I was just about coming to the end of my tether, and that place suggested, more than anything else she'd shown me, the ghastly things that it had been planned to counteract. I hated the scene, too, not just because I always dislike it. I hated the incense, too, not just because I always dislike it, but because it seemed to me, the thought's a horrid one, but I couldn't help it, like the smell of disinfectant in a mortuary that's been put there to conceal others. I ached to find some way of escaping without wounding her. "Yes, I'm sure it's a great comfort to you," I said, "but don't you think it's time we found my husband and Mr. Furnivall? It gets dark so early, and I'm afraid we shall have to go soon. Besides, Mr. Furnivall promised to show me some manuscripts." She closed the door reluctantly. "Of course, we must give you tea before you go," she said. "I'm afraid I've wasted the whole afternoon in talking to you. You'd forgive me, my dear, if you realized what a comfort it's been. Yes, we'll go downstairs." We did so, slowly. She seemed tired. At the top of the first flight she paused. I think I saw them go in there," she said. "Hadn't I better look inside?" By this time I really couldn't bear any more opening of doors. I stood, burning, with my back to her while she did so. "No, I must have been mistaken," she said. "How curious." Down we went, step by step. Every minute I felt happier at getting nearer to Ronald. It was just as if we'd been separated for ages, like the end of the war. At the bottom of the second flight she stopped again. The landing was deadly silent. She seemed to be listening, staring at a closed door on the left. "Why," she said suddenly, "I believe they're quarreling. How perfectly dreadful of them." and still not a sound. Evidently, either she or I had gone mad. She hurried forward to the door and opened it, and I saw the interior of the library in which we had sat talking. There was Ronald, standing at the lectern, looking up from that open Bible toward Mr. Furnivall. And there was Mr. Furnivall, his legs wide apart, in front of the fire, stroking his smooth chin. As I came in, our eyes met. We didn't speak a word, but it seemed to me as if our minds were in a state that made words unnecessary. His mind challenged mine. "Well, what do you think of it all?" it said, and mine answered his with words that jagged through my brain like lightning and split the middle of my skull on their way out. "You are the devil in this house." I felt as if I had shouted them. Then he came towards us, rubbing his hands and smiling. "So you are here at last," he said. "Better late than never. When once these women get to talking, Wake, ha? Well, Mrs. Furnivall, what about a spot of tea?" Ronald took my arm quietly. It was like heaven to feel him near me again, to know that he was alive, and that I was alive, and sane. We all went down to the ground floor together. And that's the end of the chapter. And dear God, Francis Brett Young, have you not heard of chapter breaks? Feel as though I've been reading for a good 2 hours. I'm sure it's not quite that much. Interesting book. A lot of the story of her time there. And more of the real horror now. Or, accounts of it. Now, this is good, because I'm not... I can't predict exactly where it's going to go. And I always do love that horror novel, or movie, or game, or anything. One of my favorite things. Nifty Ness, how are you doing tonight? You guys, please go check out Nifty Ness. What seems to be the bother? Is chat having issues? Where's my mouse having issues? Yeah, I suppose it's got to act up. End of stream is the best time for it. Guys, please go check out Nifty Ness. Bot needs banning. But definitely enjoying this novel. Nice there. All good horror novels in the public domain to be discovered. Now, let me see who we're going to raid. If indeed it will allow it. I'm also having another GPU issue, which fortunately didn't crash OBS this time, but that means I need to update the drivers. Force an update, and that'll fix it. They have been getting more frequent, it seems. Yeah, I hope I can get another year or two out of this computer. Let's see who's still online. Yeah, she's not. Yeah. Lovely. Neon's playing ninja games. Ghoul is still playing Grim Fandango. Oh. I could rate Yaden, but interestingly, here's someone. Retro Perspective is reading H.P. Lovecraft. I do love Lovecraft, and I feel like I've met Retro Perspective before. Let's see if he allows raids. And if not, we'll raid our friend Yaden. Oh, but that's what's coming up on stream, so sorry. I'm doing alright, thanks, Niftiness. It's been a somewhat long day, and I'm in for a long day tomorrow. But not bad. Glad I got to get this stream in, especially since I missed stream on Sunday. I really did enjoy. I do a haunted hayride and scare mazes with a good friend of mine. It was good to see her again. But, there we are. So on Wednesday, I still intend to stream, and we'll continue Resident Evil 3. Imagine we just have a few streams left. Then Saturday, heaven knows what I'll do for Short Horror Saturday. Should find something. Maybe. But Sunday, we're going to try and finish Pumpkin Jack, which we'd started streaming for Spooktober. See if we can't do it in one nice 5-hour stream. God, I don't think I have anything this Sunday. Tentative plans. And yes, we will get back to A Nameless Inheritance at some point. And start a new adventure game at some point. Maybe some more Nancy Drew or Carol Reed or something. Oh, fun stuff coming up on stream. Very good. Make sure I spelled it right, yes. And he allows it. Oh no, indeed. I did not spell it right. Sorry. You know, these people with underscores at the ends of their names. Good. I gotta get dinner. And then get to bed. Good hour bus ride. And then a half-hour car ride to even get there tomorrow. And it starts an hour before I normally be at work. Ah, that seems to have gotten it. But thank you, chaps, for coming to hang out and enjoy late night spooky novels. I appreciate all the chatters and all the lurkers. And you guys can find me on Twitter and MySpace, where I post stream announcements, occasional polls, and random things. You can find VODs of my past streams up on YouTube, and you can find my channel in the Retroactive Discord server. Oh, and thanks to everybody who contributed points to the community challenge. Almost forgot about that. There's something else I was going to say about Discord. I don't remember. Oh yeah, don't forget to vote, everybody. It's a little late, isn't it? November 5th. Don't forget to vote next year. Say hi to Retro Perspective. Have a great night, and I'll see you guys Wednesday. Saturday, barring that.